Last chance, Coulter.
Please, I'm
Hand over the
begging you, I'm
savage or we burn
trying.
everything to the ground. The
I
shout
haven't
pierced the
done
dusty air
anything.
as gunfire erupted around the log cabin. Mason Coulter felt warm blood trickle down his cheek from a bullet that had grazed him moments earlier. He checked his Remington, 2 bullets left. Outside, 7 men had surrounded his homestead. Mason glanced at the tall Apache woman crouching by the window, her steady hands gripping the Winchester he'd just given her. The firelight caught the determination in her eyes. "You could turn me over to them," she said, her voice deep and solid as sandstone. "I do not fear death." Mason wiped the blood from his face, pulled his hat brim down, and checked his gun one more time. "Someone's gonna die today," he said, "but it ain't gonna be us." Arizona Territory, 1878. 1 year after the war with Apache leader Geronimo, Mason Coulter, 45, former Army Scout and Civil War veteran, rode his Black Horse Scout across the sun-baked desert. The scars on his back, remnants from the Battle of Antietam, where he dragged 3 wounded men to safety under Confederate fire, ached in the heat. He wasn't a scout anymore. Now he owned a small ranch by Paradise Creek, where he raised 100 head of cattle and 6 horses. Not a fancy life, but it was his own. And after witnessing the horrors at Gettysburg and the blood-soaked fields of Chickamauga, solitude was all he wanted. The land here was harsh. Desert days scorched your skin. Nights chilled your bones. But Mason had learned to love this land. It was harsh but honest, unlike folks back east with their lies and empty promises. Today, he was heading to Redemption Town for supplies, ammunition, medicine, and whiskey to ward off the nightmares that still came 15 years after the war. He nudged Scout forward when he spotted smoke rising from the horizon, a way station about 20 miles outside town. Through his spyglass, Mason saw 5 horses tied outside, too fine for such a backwater stop. Mason approached cautiously, tying Scout at a distance. He drew his Remington, 6 bullets, greased and ready. 15 years as a scout had taught him to never trust coincidence. From the window, he saw 5 armed men inside. His blood froze when he recognized the man in the center, Frank Bishop, a notorious slave trader with a $500 bounty in 3 states. More than that, Bishop was Mason's former lieutenant in the 7th Cavalry, the man who'd betrayed their unit to Comanche raiders in '69, resulting in 11 dead soldiers. 2,000 for her, Bishop was saying, nodding toward a locked door. She's Swift Eagle's daughter. Trade her to Geronimo for 3 bags of gold. Mason started to back away. This wasn't his fight. Then, a faint sound came from the locked room, the soft whimper of someone clinging to life. Mason Coulter knew that sound too well, the sound of someone about to die. "God damn it," he muttered. "Not again." Mason waited until 3 of Bishop's men left to check their horses, 2 against 1. He'd faced worse at Shiloh. He kicked in the door, gun aimed at Bishop. "Don't move," Mason said, voice cold as a mountain stream. "Didn't expect to see you still breathing, Bishop." Bishop's hand froze above his holster. A slow, yellow-toothed grin spread across his face. Mason Coulter, the hero of Antietam, thought the Apaches got you years ago. The key. Mason kept his gun steady, fighting the urge to shoot the man who'd left him for dead in Comanche territory. Bishop tossed him a rusty key. "You don't know what you're stepping in, Coulter. This ain't just about money or the girl. This leads to the Apache treasure." Mason backed toward the locked room, unlocked it while keeping his gun trained on Bishop. Inside, a tall Apache woman was tied to a center post. Despite torn buckskin clothes and bloody wrists, her posture remained straight as steel. Her eyes, black and sharp as obsidian, locked onto Mason. "Take me away," she said, her voice rough but strong. "I will repay with my life." Mason cut her bonds with his hunting knife. The alarm whistle sounded. The others were returning. "Run?" she asked. Mason nodded. Fast! They burst through the back door as gunfire erupted behind them. Mason fired twice, dropping one man. They leaped onto Scout, the battle-trained horse needing no urging as Mason dug in his heels. "Your name?" he shouted as they galloped into the desert. "Nahimana," she answered, her arms gripping his waist. "It means thunder spirit." Mason allowed himself a grim smile. "Fitting." Mason led them into a narrow canyon where only one rider could pass at a time, perfect for an ambush. "Bishop will follow," Mason said as they dismounted. "He and I have unfinished business." "What business?" Nahimana asked, examining her raw wrists. Mason's jaw tightened. 8 years ago, he sold out our cavalry unit to Comanche raiders. 11 men died. I took a Comanche arrow and was left for dead. Bishop claimed I deserted. So this is about revenge. "No," Mason said, checking his ammunition. "Revenge is a luxury I gave up long ago." "Then why help me?" Mason looked into the distance, seeing ghosts from another time. "Because I've left too many behind." The faces haunted him nightly. The 17 men under his command at Gettysburg, 14 dead. His wife Sarah and 4-year-old Timothy, both taken by smallpox while he fought in Tennessee. When he returned home, he found only 2 small graves in an empty cabin. "They come," Nahimana said suddenly, her head tilting like a predator catching a scent. 5 riders. Mason nodded and handed her his backup pistol, a Colt Peacemaker. "Know how to shoot?" "I am better with bow and knife," she said, "but I learned fast." Mason showed her how to hold the gun. "Grip firm. Aim before you pull. And remember, men like Bishop don't fight fair." The horses approached, Bishop leading 3 men. Mason counted to 3, then stood from cover. "Bishop," he called, "you still got 2 choices after all these years. Turn back or die." Bishop laughed. "Coulter, you're still bad at counting. 4 of us, 1 of you." "2." Nahimana stood, gun pointed at Bishop's chest. "Well, the savage speaks English," Bishop mocked. "You know what she's worth, Coulter. She knows the location of the Apache treasure. Gold from Spanish wagon trains raided 100 years ago." "Last chance, Bishop," Mason said, finger tightening on the trigger. "Over your dead body. Again." Gunfire echoed off canyon walls. Mason's first shot caught a rider square in the chest, toppling him backward. Nahimana fired but missed. Bishop and his remaining men dove for cover behind boulders. "Conserve ammo," Mason whispered. "They're stalling for reinforcements." The gunfight stretched 10 minutes, neither side gaining advantage. A bullet grazed Mason's arm, but he barely felt it. He'd felt worse at Bull Run. "We need to move," he said. "Follow me." They retreated deeper into the canyon where horses couldn't follow. Mason knew another exit leading to Apache territory. As they moved, Nahimana talked. She was captured after an army raid on her village. Her younger sister had been killed before her eyes. Her father, Swift Eagle, fought alongside Geronimo. "Bishop thinks I know the treasure's location," she said. "Only my father knows." Mason nodded, asking no more. Every warrior had secrets worth dying for. They walked through the night, stopping only when Scout needed rest. At a creek, Nahimana washed her wounded wrists. "Let me," Mason said, taking his medicine bag from the saddle. He cleaned her wounds with whiskey. Nahimana didn't flinch. "You are the first white man to treat me as human," she said quietly. Instead of answering, Mason told her about his ranch, the cattle, the creek full of spring trout, the log house he'd built by hand after the war. "That sounds," Nahimana hesitated, "peaceful." "That was the idea," Mason said. "A place where ghosts couldn't find me." As they prepared to leave, Nahimana suddenly gripped Mason's arm. "Many riders approaching." Mason listened. She was right. At least 8 men were closing in, too many to fight. They mounted Scout and rode into the forest, but they'd gone barely 100 yards when gunshots rang out. Nahimana cried out, blood seeping through her buckskin shirt at the shoulder. "Hold on!" Mason urged Scout faster, bullets whistling around them. They splashed across a stream and disappeared into thick pine forest. Once safe, Mason examined Nahimana's wound. The bullet had left a deep furrow across her shoulder. Not fatal, but infection would kill her without proper care. "My ranch is closest," Mason said. "I have medicine there." "No," Nahimana protested. "You've done enough. Apache territory is 3 days' ride." Mason cut her off. "You'll be dead from fever before then." Nahimana's fierce eyes met his. "Why do you care, Mason Coulter? I have nothing to give you." Mason tore a strip from his shirt, pressed it against her wound. "Not everyone wants something in return." They rode in silence, Nahimana growing weaker from blood loss. By nightfall, fever made her shiver, despite the warm air. The ranch appeared in the moonlight, a sturdy log house, barn, and creek. Mason carried Nahimana inside and laid her on his bed. With a surgeon's focus, he cleaned and stitched her wound. Through the night, Nahimana spoke deliriously in Apache. Mason stayed awake, changing cool cloths on her forehead. By dawn, her fever broke. "You didn't sleep," Nahimana said, voice weak but clear. "Old habit," he replied. "You'll live. Because of you." Mason nodded and went outside to scan the horizon. Bishop would come. It was only a matter of time. 3 days passed. Nahimana recovered quickly, helping with ranch chores. With a bow she crafted herself, she took down a deer from a distance that left Mason speechless. They rarely spoke. No need. They'd survived together, a bond stronger than words. On the 4th morning, Scout's warning whinny sent Mason for his spyglass. 5 riders approaching, Bishop in the lead. "They found us," Mason said, returning to the house where Nahimana checked her bowstring. "Bishop and 4 men. "Hand me over," she said without fear. "End this." Mason shook his head. "That's not how this ends." He took 2 rifles from his cabinet and laid them on the table with ammunition boxes. "You've gotten better with the pistol. Time to try the Winchester." Mason looked out the window. Bishop's group had stopped 100 yards out. "He won't attack right away. He likes to play with his prey first." As expected, Bishop rode forward alone, holding a white cloth. "Coulter," he called. "Let's talk, soldier to soldier." Mason checked his Remington and turned to Nahimana. "If I don't return in 5 minutes..." "I know how to kill," she finished for him. Mason stepped onto the porch, gun at his side. "Close enough, Bishop." Bishop raised his hand, sneering. "We're both civilized men, Coulter. Just want to talk business." "Talk?" $1,000 for the savage, Bishop said. "That's generous. You could buy 50 head of prime cattle." "Not interested." "2,000 then. Final offer." Mason stared hard at the man who'd left him to die. "She's not for sale." Bishop's false smile vanished. "You've gone soft, Coulter. The man I knew would have sold his own mother for half that. The man you knew died in Comanche territory. Maybe he should have stayed dead." Bishop's eyes narrowed. "Jim Wallace from Redemption Town sends his regards. Told us exactly where to find you." Mason kept his face impassive, but the betrayal stung. Wallace had helped rebuild his barn just last month. "Tonight, Coulter," Bishop said, turning his horse, "I'll take the girl, then burn everything you've built to the ground. Just like old times." When Mason returned inside, Nahimana stood with the Winchester, her face a warrior's mask. "Wallace betrayed you," she said. "I heard." Mason began pushing furniture against windows, creating defensive positions. "Everyone has their price." "You could leave," Nahimana said. "This is my fight. They'll burn this place whether I stay or go. At least I get to put a bullet in Bishop first." Nahimana set down her rifle and helped barricade the windows. "You are a strange white man, Mason Coulter." "So I've been told." They prepared through the day. Mason dug a shelter under the floorboards and set alarm traps around the perimeter, thin wires connected to tin cans. At dusk, they ate venison from Nahimana's hunt, perhaps their last meal. "Why do you live alone?" she asked. Mason stared into his cup. "Had a family once. Wife, son." "What happened?" "Smallpox, while I was fighting at Chattanooga." Nahimana nodded. "My people believe those we love watch over us after death." Mason looked into the fire. "If that's true, Sarah and Timothy are going to have their hands full tonight." Their shared laugh was brief but genuine, a moment of light before darkness fell. They extinguished all lamps and took positions. Mason at the front window, Nahimana at the back. Neither spoke. The first alarm came at midnight. A can rattled in the darkness. "South side," Mason whispered. "Scout!" Gunfire erupted. A bullet splintered the window frame inches from Mason's head. He returned fire, aiming at the muzzle flash. A cry of pain told him he'd found his mark. "One down," he said. Nahimana remained silent at her post. Suddenly, a ball of fire arced through the air, landing on the roof. Mason heard flames crackling above. "Fire arrows," he called. "Your roof is steep," Nahimana replied calmly. "It will slide off." She was right. The fire rolled down the roof and fell harmlessly to the ground. But Bishop had planned for this. When Mason turned to watch the roof, a volley of bullets came from the front. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Mason and Nahimana dropped to the floor. "Distraction," Mason said. "Classic cavalry tactic." "To create approach paths," Nahimana finished. "We use the same against soldiers." They retreated deeper into the house, standing back to back. "Ready?" Mason asked. "Always," she replied, voice hard as flint. The front door crashed inward. Two men rushed in, guns blazing. Mason's shot hit the first man's center mass, the second dove behind an overturned table. Simultaneously, the back door splintered open. Nahimana fired twice. A man screamed. Smoke began filling the house. The barn was ablaze, flames reaching for the night sky. "Move!" Mason shouted. "Kitchen door!" He fired covering shots, forcing the gunmen behind the table to keep down. They burst through the kitchen door onto the back porch. In the moonlight, they saw Bishop and two remaining men approaching from the burning barn. Mason and Nahimana took cover behind the stone well. "Coulter!" Bishop shouted. "Nowhere left to run, deserter!" Mason checked his gun. "2 bullets. You?" "4, Nahimana replied. "Save them for Bishop." Mason raised up and fired. One of Bishop's men fell. Now just Bishop and one gunman remained. Nahimana whispered something in Apache, a prayer or curse. Then she stood and fired 2 precise shots at a man trying to flank their position. He collapsed mid-stride. Only Bishop remained. The house was fully engulfed now, flames painting the night orange and red. Mason watched 15 years of work burning to ash. Cold fury replaced the ache in his chest. "Bishop," he called, "just you and me now." Like it should have been years ago. "And the savage," Bishop replied from behind a water trough. "Send her out, and maybe I let you live." Nahimana looked at Mason. "I will go." "No." Mason gripped her arm. "We finish this together." He shed his coat, revealing a small derringer tucked in his belt. 3 rounds, he said. "Enough." They exchanged a silent look, understanding the plan. Nahimana would draw Bishop's attention. Mason would end it. "Bishop!" Nahimana stood tall, Winchester raised. "You want me? I am here." Bishop focused on her, rising slightly from cover. It was all Mason needed. He rolled right, firing twice from the derringer. Bishop staggered back, blood spreading across his chest. Mason approached his former lieutenant, gun trained on Bishop's heart. "Should have made sure I was dead. In Comanche territory." Bishop gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. "I'm making sure now," Mason replied, and fired his final shot. As smoke cleared, Mason and Nahimana stood amid the ruins. House and barn reduced to embers. Only the well and part of the fence remained intact. "I am sorry about your home," Nahimana said. Mason surveyed the destruction, then unexpectedly smiled. "Just wood and nails. I've rebuilt before." "You will rebuild again?" "Yes." Mason looked to the stars. "This is my home." 4 months later, a new house stood where the old one had burned, larger, sturdier. Mason had worked from dawn to dusk, with occasional help from the few Redemption Town folks who hadn't sided with Wallace. Nahimana had stayed, though Mason never asked why. She'd taught him to track and hunt the Apache way. He'd shown her to herd cattle and break horses. They worked in companionable silence. Two warriors who understood loss and survival needed few words. One morning, as Mason mended fencing, he spotted dust clouds approaching. He grabbed his new Winchester, purchased with money from selling cattle. "Nahimana," he called. "Riders coming." She appeared instantly beside him, bow in hand. As the riders neared, Mason lowered his rifle. "Apache warriors," he said. 5 Apache men in battle dress approached the ranch. Their leader was older, face weathered like desert canyons, wearing an eagle feather necklace marking him as chief. "Father!" Nahimana stepped forward. Swift Eagle, the legendary Apache chief, was on Mason's land. Mason stood his ground as father and daughter spoke rapidly in Apache. The warriors watched him, hands on weapons. Nahimana turned back. "My father wishes to meet the man who saved his daughter." Mason approached unarmed. Swift Eagle dismounted, standing eye to eye with Mason. "Sir," Mason said with a respectful nod. Swift Eagle returned the gesture. "My daughter says you are an honorable man," he said in perfect English. "The first white man she has called this." Mason remained silent. "She also says you lost everything protecting her," Swift Eagle continued. "Home, livestock, friends in your town." "I'm rebuilding," Mason replied. "Nothing that can't be replaced." Swift Eagle surveyed the half-finished ranch. "You build alone. This will take seasons." "I have time," the chief nodded thoughtfully. "Tomorrow 20 Apache men will come. They will help you build." Mason couldn't hide his surprise. "Why would you help me?" "Apache never forget blood debts," Swift Eagle said firmly. "You saved my daughter. My men will help make this place a fortress." "Fortress?" Swift Eagle's weathered face showed a rare smile. "Dark times approach, Mason Coulter. Your army pushes us from ancestral lands. We need safe ground. Neutral ground, where both sides can speak without bloodshed." Mason glanced at Nahimana, who nodded. "Your ranch sits between Apache territory and white settlements," Swift Eagle explained. "It could become a bridge between worlds, a place to trade, a place to talk, not fight." Mason understood the chief's vision. "And Nahimana?" "My daughter will remain," the chief said, "as our voice, our translator, our peacemaker." This wasn't what Mason had expected when he'd unlocked that dark room 4 months ago. "Do you accept this offer, Mason Coulter?" Swift Eagle asked. "Will you make your land neutral ground for both our peoples?" Mason looked at his half-built ranch, at Nahimana, at the Apache warriors. This wasn't his original plan, but plans rarely survive first contact with reality, first lesson of scouting. "I accept," he said, extending his hand. Swift Eagle clasped Mason's forearm in the Apache way, instead of shaking hands. "Then it is decided. Mason Coulter's ranch becomes peace ground." As Swift Eagle and his warriors departed, Nahimana stood with Mason on the new porch. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Your life changes forever with this decision." Mason gazed toward distant mountains where Sarah and Timothy lay. "My life hasn't been what I planned since they died. Maybe it's time for a new purpose." Nahimana touched his arm, a rare gesture between them. "My people say, the man who fights alone dies alone. The man who fights for a tribe lives forever in their memory." Mason nodded. understanding. Then let's build something that outlasts us both, he said. Right here. 1 year later, Mason's Ranch, now known as Covenant Ground, hosted its first trading day. Apache families from the mountains and settlers from 3 towns gathered under the massive ramada built by Swift Eagle's men. Goods changed hands. Stories were shared. Children from both worlds played together. Mason watched from his porch, a Winchester across his knees, not for use, but as a reminder of what had been sacrificed to create this peace. Jim Wallace, the man who had betrayed Mason to Bishop, stood nervously at the edge of the gathering, hat in hand. "You asked to see me?" Mason said, not rising from his chair. "I come to apologize," Wallace said, eyes downcast. "Bishop threatened my family." "I understand fear," Mason replied evenly, "but a man who betrays once will do it again." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can trade here. Your family's welcome, but you'll never be my friend again." Wallace nodded and retreated, understanding the gift he'd been given, honesty without a bullet. Nahimana joined Mason on the porch, watching as an Apache elder taught a settler's wife how to grind corn properly. "Your ranch has a new name among my people," she said. "They call it the place between worlds." Mason smiled slightly. "Better than Coulter's Folly, which is what Redemption Town calls it." "They will learn," Nahimana said confidently. "As will my people." Mason nodded, watching as U.S. Cavalry Lieutenant Davis, one of the few officers who believed in peaceful solutions, spoke with Swift Eagle. Seeds of understanding being planted. "I never thanked you," Mason said quietly. "For what?" "Giving me purpose again. After Sarah and Timothy died, I was just existing," Nahimana nodded. "And I never thanked you for showing me not all white men are like Bishop." A commotion at the ranch entrance drew their attention. A cavalry officer Mason didn't recognize rode in with 10 armed soldiers. "That's Colonel Harrington," Lieutenant Davis said, approaching the porch. "Just transferred from Washington. He's hunting Geronimo and doesn't believe in neutral ground." Mason stood, Winchester in hand, but pointed downward. "Then I reckon it's time he learned about it." Because in this harsh land, the strongest bonds weren't formed through blood relation or romantic love, but through fire, blood, and honor. And Mason Coulter had found something worth fighting for again. Next week, folks, I'll tell you about the showdown at Covenant Ground, where Mason Coulter and Nahimana faced their greatest challenge when Colonel Harrington, who's sworn to capture or kill Geronimo at any cost, threatens the fragile peace they built. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you want to hear more tales from the Wild West.